Hey, it's Soul, and welcome back to Warcraft Weekly, the show that comes at you like a Saturday morning cartoon or, some equivalent regularly scheduled program. The support coming from you folks lately has been amazing. I'm super grateful and thank you. But now let's keep up that momentum by liking the video, double check and make sure that you're even subscribed to the channel. And let's begin with what felt like was a fantastic interview between game director Ion Hazzikostas and Max, the GM of WoW's Team Liquid. Before I start, you might be like, oh, well, Yankee. Or you might be like, all he cares about is like the big three content. And that's true. Giga true for those who are familiar with the guy. And I don't mind that so much. Like, Max doesn't even try to pretend to care about lore or world content or professions, nothing that doesn't translate into competitive player power. But the interview was still very interesting because he still manages to talk with a very relatable tone, and he got Ian to talk about some broader WoW design philosophy that does matter to everyone in some way, shape, or form. I invite you to watch the VOD. A link to that is somewhere up here or in the description or wherever, but if not, stick around. I'm going to go over the highlights, I'll blast out a few comments, and let's go. While it's been imperfect, Season 4 as a concept has been a success for the WoW team. By that, we're talking about the whole idea of taking the raids, the raids from the expansion, and putting them on a rotation, with obtaining items faster with a vendor because, we've defeated these bosses like months or years ago, so it's not that big of a deal. Or lifting Valor and Conquest caps because we ain't got time for that. So it's kind of a victory lap after the expansion is over. It seems like this is something that the team wants to do going forward, at least some semblance of it, to break the lull that we would otherwise be in today. And of course, they want to make improvements to these things to make the experience better for everyone, hopefully including world content players this time around. In the case of Shadowlands, I wouldn't have minded at least lifting restrictions around, Covenant and Sanctums, and I think you know what I'm talking about. Like maybe having account-wide progress on Sanctum upgrades, more anima and Grateful Offering boosts, and especially making those cosmetic tokens account-wide. You might have been noticing this already, but according to the interview, the game is slowly but surely moving towards dissolving the barriers that separate us. That includes cross-server guilds, which I hope is mostly going to be like a special sort of WoW community, but you can only be in one at a time. Cross-faction guilds are no longer a matter of if, but when. Ian talked about the work behind it like pulling on a thread and seeing what in the spaghetti code unravels. So there's basically a ton of back-end infrastructure that needs to be ironed out before cross-faction guilds are a thing. He didn't make a promise, but he did share his desire to make cross-faction guilds a reality by the end of Dragonflight. The WoW team has heard loud and clear that dragon riding is fun. Max said it, I've been saying it, and it's just a matter of time before you all get a crack at it too. Since the start of the alpha, they've begun talks about the positive feedback and possibly incorporating dragon riding in old zones. I know a handful of folks out there are clamoring for it to be enabled like sooner than later, as in now. That all it takes is the flip of a switch, but I'm going to repeat some old talking points. Not every mount would feel right with dragon riding. Like, how does dragon riding work with mounts that don't have wings to simulate this sort of effect? Players have hundreds of mounts and they don't want to see their favorite one be devalued because all of a sudden not all mounts are made equal. I remember how people were flipping out over just the Water Strider mount, and that was just a ground mount walking on water. But the point that I'm really standing behind is this. People just need to try this thing out. Alpha testers are like the 1%. They're these privileged little punks that they think they're better than everybody, but not me, because I am better than them. But alpha testers simply aren't a good or a big enough measure of how everyone is going to feel. Everyone ought to have their say in this, and before that, they've got to try it out. I'm not saying don't. I'm a huge fan of this, and I'm definitely not saying don't, but I am saying wait. When it gets done, let's make sure it gets done right with everyone's input. A bit of class news from the interview as well. The Evoker class is going to get a bloodlust cooldown, joining the ranks of Shaman and Mages and Beastmaster Hunters. Meanwhile, combat reses or B-reses are going to be added to another class, with the top candidate apparently being the Paladin. I've heard lots of comments saying that all healers should have a combat res, and I hear you, that kind of makes sense. However, it wouldn't be very consistent. Death Knights can combat res and they're not healers. Warlocks can combat res, and, well, they're pure DPS classes. So if nothing else, Paladins share a consistency with Druids as one of the few classes that have a tank, a healing, and a DPS role. But it would also be funny for a monk, right? It'd be funny for a monk to like splash a corpse with liquor, revival liquor even, and they just pop right back up. At the end of the interview, Ian posed a question to us, although it was more for like mythic people. The question was, how would we feel if normal, heroic, and mythic difficulty raids launched simultaneously? He didn't mention Raid Finder, boo sauce, but let's stick with the idea of mythic launching day 1 of the season. Now, for me, and I'm sure a ton of other folks, it wouldn't mean a thing. There's no change in my player behavior at all. In fact, I'm going to pull this up. See here? There's my raid progression. I could not even be bothered to farm Mythic Terror Group for the gear. That's what Mythic means to me. I bet that even with week 1 availability, most guilds in the top 100 won't even bother with Mythic at all that week because, well, they're better off slamming normal, especially if there are tier sets involved, or learning from heroic and then running keys for guaranteed gear in that first or second week. But what will top raiders do? It's an interesting question that had Max kind of stumped for a bit, but to be fair, it was a fresh question and he was put on the spot. For those of us who watch at least some of the Race to World First, teams spend the first week of the season grinding away doing split runs to get as much gear as they can for their characters and their alt characters and their alt characters before the race actually begins. So yeah, in fact, you can say that the split runs are the start of the race. A simultaneous launch of difficulties presents a somewhat different challenge for teams to manage their time wisely. Like, how much time do they spend doing split runs versus progression? How much of a disadvantage would it be for like Team 1 to start progressing while Team 2 is gearing up and they're just gonna watch what Team 1 does? Would this damage the transparency of the race? I'm not going to get too much into it, I don't have a great perspective, but I would like you folks to share your curiosity with me here. Like, would this be good for you if you happen to be a Mythic Raider? Would it make a difference? Is this going to be healthy or bad for the concept of the Race to World First? Is this going to divide the Americas and the European regions even further? Not sure, but let me know your thoughts on any of these topics in a comment. So it's another week and another Dragonflight build. Slowly but surely, the different activities of Endgame have been revealing themselves. Now, there isn't a lot of new information to share on that front, but instead, this week, we're going to take a look at some interface upgrades. I tried to make that sound exciting. It actually is, though. Here's one that could have come like years ago. A hotkey used to interact with NPCs will now work with objects. This sounds kind of frightening, like maybe it wasn't a thing because an action like this could be abused by bots. However, well, the days of giant mounts getting in the way of clicking a thing can be put behind us. Right now, with the push of a hotkey, you can open up dialogue with your target. Whoop-de-doo. But the same key will now interact with the closest nearby object. This makes interacting with important clickables in combat much easier to do. It kind of reminds me of that item that lets you interact with Warlock gates more easily, while this is a full-on quality of life fix. It works with mining and herbing, and I also tried this, but it's very unreliable with fishing. 9 out of 10 times your little bobber thing is way too far for the interact command to reach it, so your days of legit AFK fishing are still pretty far away. Here's something new. You'll be able to press and hold a key to cast the same ability over and over again. The WoW team calls it press and hold casting, and I guess they're right. I can keep spamming the same thing with no latency in between, and that's a really neat change. Side effect though, this works with all abilities. So if I want to spam my Blessed Hammer charges, my Consecration, or my auras, I guess, which is, kind of silly, but at least I can. This also only works on actual abilities and not macros or items. It's still kind of a neat feature to have if current casters can't have charge abilities like evokers, but at least they can throw out some filler spells without worrying so much about lag. Here's a weird one that the WoW team calls Action Combat. Never mind the name, what this feature does is make you auto-select a target that your character is facing. I can see this working great for very basic movement, but I'm loath to let the game assume that it knows what I'm thinking or what I'm trying to select. As a tank, I often have to precision click to select a caster or taunt something that's behind my character, and no doubt that in the heat of battle, I'm going to end up selecting enemies that I don't mean to. Dragon riding continues to feel great. In fact, between the tweaks and them finally getting talent points to work right, dragon riding feels even easier than before. This week they added a ride-along feature that lets party members sort of jump on someone else's back, and that person can take them around. This is expected to work in one of the dungeons, which, spoiler alert, will employ the use of dragon riding. This kind of kills the idea of multi-seater flying mounts, and well, to be honest, I don't mind it so much. That felt more like a privilege when really, like, everyone should have the right to that sort of accessibility, despite the concerns over bots and multi-boxers and all that. Mining debuted this week, but surprisingly not herbalism. Still, this gives us a good initial idea of what more natural movement is going to feel like on the Dragon Isles. And I mean, it's great zipping through the skies at crazy speeds, getting from point A to point B in no time, but now let's put flying to the real test with farming. The early impressions that I have are pretty good though. I'm finding ore at what feels like a decent speed. There's definitely a lack of variety of the mining nodes that I've seen. There's supposed to be 16 different kinds, with the rare nodes being, well, extremely rare, considering how fast I can sweep a zone. But I also don't want nodes to be too plentiful or too dense and clustered, otherwise my mount runs out of vigor and I end up taking breaks, and that's not going to feel good. Because of the nature of gathering, and when we also consider things like sky golems and druid flight form, gathering is going to be one of the foils of dragon riding. I'm only giving my take here, and my takes are pretty positive here, but lots of folks are going to have different opinions. We also learn more about recrafting and crafted gear in general. Just as announced, there's a limit of 5 crafted pieces that can be worn at a time, with a pretty hilarious penalty if you happen to wear more than the allowed. Here's what's pretty interesting though. Now I know it's alpha, and this could be like some placeholder of sorts, but this is a very weird placeholder. Like, check it out. Why is there a buff that reminds me how many pieces of gear that I'm wearing? Like, this is on your actual buff bar, not just like some obscure tooltip. The information displayed on gear tooltips in the past, they seem to work out just fine, so why the change? Now it could be that this buff over time could change. So now I'm not fond of the WoW team playing like the invisible hand, telling me from where and how fast I'm able to gear, especially in the face of like Season 4 gearing right now. But let's sweep those thoughts aside for just a moment and keep an open mind. Let's speculate for fun. Now I'm going to remind you of this item here, the spark of ingenuity that's needed to create any epic piece of gear. And players will be able to earn one every like few weeks or so. We're still not sure exactly how much. And then there's this primal chaos and primal infusion, which can be earned from different endgame content, both indoors and outdoors, to make the item level of gear higher. Now, think of these as Dragonflight crafting items Season 1. If at the start of Dragonflight Season 1, we can wear 5 crafted pieces up to mythic item level, perhaps towards the end of the season, maybe that buff can loosen up to a point where more slots can be filled with crafted gear. Maybe not every slot, but maybe like 7 or 9 or something like that. Now let's jump even further ahead to Season 2. It could be that a new item will be available every few weeks, a Spark of Ingenuity Mark II, that when applied, it'll let us craft new gear and at a higher base item level, as well as we'll get like a new Season 2 version of Primal Chaos and Infusion. A Season 2 buff will appear that only lets you wear a total of 5 pieces of Season 2 crafted gear. The buff is relaxed over time over the course of the season. The process repeats itself over and over and over forever. Now I could be very, very wrong about this. In fact, I most likely am. But I think that this buff strongly hints that crafting can be taken very seriously in Dragonflight, and that it's going to result in huge dividends and prestige for its crafters. In my headcanon at least, it all fits. Seasonal resources with the sparks and primal items, paced in such a way that supply is controlled, as much as you might hate that. And it's reinforced with this equip limit to not toe step on the big 3, but it's displayed as a buff or a debuff to allow flexibility over the course of a season. It's kind of like, I guess, lifting the Conquest and Valor limits. And then we get a new season, new seasonal items coming in, and it'll cause this kind of sort of gear reset. The old gear will go for cheap, and it's going to be naturally phased out. Maybe by then, the WoW team will figure out some way to scrap the old gear for some resources maybe. Or maybe there's going to be a way to directly upgrade Season 1 crafted gear to Season 2, although, Well, when I think about it, that would probably disrupt the resource market in more or less a bad way. Sorry about the rant there. I just think that we stumbled upon something really, really big. I mean, this week is turning out to be really big for the future of World of Warcraft, I think. Excuse me while I get some more copium here. Wow! Whew. Anyway, this was quite a week. I admit it's not a lot of substance, but we're looking through the window, I guess, into this crazy future of having fewer barriers to separate players, with professions moving closer towards becoming part of the big three or big four. So I'm finding all of this super exciting. And that's also the show. So how did we do this week? All right, chokes. Everyone soaks for this one. Everybody. Ooh.
Wow.
Ooh, wow.
First wave.
What the heck?
Yeah, that's how. Daddy reminded us why we address him as Sire. It took us a good hour to just remember how the encounter went, but between that and the effects, even after the nerfs, we didn't quite have the fire to spend like an entire night on him. Instead, I wanted to do something fun like go to my very first Lower Karazhan since Legion, and it was a great way to end the night. Going back to the thing about crafted gear and world content, I'm sorry, the copium, it's really like kicking in right now. Like, I'm trying to be calm about everything that I'm soaking in from all this testing. Not all the features are even close to being like really functional and testable enough to where I can like speak about them, unless you want to hear me talk about, hey, what are these spinning turtles that I'm fighting? But Dragonflight has me more excited about a WoW expansion since, I guess, Legion, because Legion was trying to introduce some really wild stuff with the artifact weapon and legendaries and Mythic Plus, which now is firmly part of what I call the big three of Endgame. Maybe I'll talk about this in a separate video, like the state of the alpha or something, but I'm starting to kind of reassess how I look at the big three in Dragonflight, at least. I'm trying to break it down to what all these things are at its core, and actually, well, what they are. What is PvP? What are dungeons? What are raids? And very simply, they're just activities. They're things to do in a loop. If Dragonflight is anything like Legion in terms of making a big splash or a big impact, it could be the expansion where we add the loops of high-level crafting to Endgame. And yeah, maybe we might see the creation of the big four, with this fourth pillar being mostly about professions as an Endgame venture, but it also encompasses the outdoor world and world content and rares and reputations and the player economy as part of its grind. I don't know if that's the vision that the WoW team has, but to be honest, I hope it is, because that can be built upon even more with player housing. Of course, I haven't forgotten, but for now, let's give a shout out to everyone who showed up this week on Twitch. It was amazing, and I'm grateful. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough to hit that partner requirement thing, but it would be so great if you all came by for a chat, or to lurk, or to have me on your second screen. The more the merrier. Coffee with Soul happens Tuesday through Thursday starting at 8:30 a.m. Pacific. Meanwhile, we have a bunch of patrons who picked up on my not-so-subtle begging from last week. A big welcome and a welcome back to Hunt, to Disjoint Dwarf, to Bethany, and Captain Why Not. You folks are amazing, and so are you, viewer, for making it to the end. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more content, and I hope you come back for more WoW and Dragonflight stuff. I'll see you next week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.